Hey, David. I'm doing all right. Looks like you're on mute, though.
How are you doing now that I'm not on mute?
Doing great.
Excellent.
Hey, everyone.
Hello.
Hey, folks.
I'm going to put a link in the chat. Folks can add their name.
It's funny, Trishank, you talk about it being APAC friendly. I would say it's more PAC friendly than A friendly.
Yeah, because it's actually 6 a.m. in Malaysia, at least right now, and China,
It's
Singapore. So,
yeah, it's 6 a.m. in Perth as well.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone.
Good evening.
It was an attempt to be.
It's better than asking people to stay up till, hilarious o'clock.
Yeah.
So far, I see more faces than names in the docs. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. So if folks can chuck their name into the notes so we know who is here. If we need to ask them questions later, it's very helpful. And we'll give it another couple of minutes before we start. Like, people are still coming in. All right, I'll give it one more minute and then we'll kick off.
Jock, I hope you don't mind, but I figure I should give a quick heads up. I'm adding it to the agenda.
Yeah, there's some overlap there with the rather more cryptic one that I had for PyPI. Yours is probably better for future readers.
Oh,
All right, let's kick it off. Dustin is out this week, so I'm filling in to chair. The first thing we like to do in these meetings is to welcome new faces. So if there's anybody who's new or who's been here before but hasn't had a chance to introduce themselves, please raise your hand and introduce yourself. All old friends here by the sound of it. Oh,
I'll introduce myself. Ian Dunbar Hall. I work for Lockheed Martin in their central DevSecOps organization. And we're doing a lot of work with secure supply chain management and doing a lot of work with Cyclone DX right now. And I figured we should be a little bit more involved here. So just listening in for the first time.
cool, welcome. Anyone's like to throw their hand in the air? Possibly like they care?
I'll reintroduce myself really quickly because I don't think I've been active since one of the earlier first organization calls, but Tim over with the Drupal Association and generally connected to sort of the PHP ecosystem and area, and back to sort of listen in some more and maybe share a little bit about what we're working towards for our tough implementation, which I'll probably just throw over in the chat as well.
Cool. Anyone anxious to introduce themselves this morning or this evening?
Sure, why not? Since this is my first APAC friendly session. I am Trishank. I'm a staff security engineer here at Datadog, and I work on Duff and Toto, Salsa, Sixdoor. So nice to work with everyone else here. Nice to see you
Nice
again.
to see you again. Yeah. All right. I should probably share my screen so you folks can see the notes as I move around them. So that's our welcomes. Thank you, everybody, for introducing yourselves, and hopefully I haven't missed anybody. I've got the first item. I wanted to, I don't know if you want to technically call this bragging, but I wanted to draw people's attention to something I failed to link to, which is the Ruby Shield announcement from Ruby Central, which is an organization that supports the development of Ruby and most particularly supports the Ruby Gems bundler and rubygems.org efforts. And Ruby Shield is an announcement that Shopify will enter a partnership to provide engineering support, but also, and this is sort of like the fancy headline, $1 million over 4 years in support as well to help the organization to be able to plan reliably over a longer time frame. And if people had any questions, I can try to answer them.
well, I guess question one is the URL I just included correct?
Yes, it is. That is exactly the right one. Thank you. Speaking for myself, I'm hopeful that this will start something of a wave for other ecosystems as well. You know, we all sort of struggle with having bandwidth to work on the many things that need to be done. So this was our effort at Shopify, and I'm hoping that other folks will step up in other communities as well to match that kind of a commitment.
As someone who uses Ruby on a daily basis, thank you.
Yay Ruby, I'm a fan.
To be fair, I'm also a fan of JavaScript, Python, and these many others, and so I'm looking forward to others picking up the challenge.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's move on to a less cheerful topic. I don't know if anybody here today is a PyPI contributor. I'm having trouble seeing faces because of the way the share screen works on a tiny laptop screen. But of course, as many of us saw, there was some, I don't know, controversy about the announcement that PyPI made that they are introducing a policy of required MFA for anyone who is I think the term is maintainer in PyPI of a package in the 1% of most downloaded packages. This is comparable to policies that are being rolled out by NPM, where it's the top 500 packages, and RubyGems, where it's the top 100 packages that are being required. PyPI went with a percentage-based approach, which is interesting. There were some folks who didn't like that, and it got a little heated in places. I think the point that David has added to the agenda is something I wanted to point out, which is that the OpenSSF Technical Advisory Council committee, it changes depending on who you ask, has noticed this and is preparing sort of like a statement of support, basically saying we think that the MFA rollout is great. We are aware that there are objections and that there are reasons to object, but that on the whole, we're in favor. I was wondering if anyone had any questions or comments about this topic, or any reflections, any commiserations.
Just as a clarifying question, I don't want to necessarily rehash the whole conversation on the comments of Y Combinator or anything like that, but was part of the objection. It sounds like one of the objections is sort of some form of a slippery slope argument about increasing requirements. Is any of it just related to access to MFA devices, right? Is it the kind of thing where organizations like YubiKey or similar could be engaged with to be like, hey, we can help you get some kind of MFA device if for some reason you don't have or don't want to use a personal device?
It's interesting you should say that. So I'm just going to steal David's thunder, I reckon. There's two things here. One is PyPI did supply vouchers for MFA keys supplied by Google, the Titan keys. So they've got a few thousand of those available. In fact, they supply 2 keys at a time to ensure you have a backup key, which is very sensible. We also, within the OpenSSF, had the Great MFA distribution, where Google and GitHub respectively provided vouchers for I think it was a couple of thousand keys. Is that right, David?
But for the Great MFA distribution project, I think we had 1,000. We didn't distribute all of them because not all projects wanted, or some projects don't have that many maintainers. But we did distribute a large number of keys.
And that was sort of half and half Google Titan keys and YubiKeys are the ones that were being provided by GitHub.
Right. I mean, we let people choose.
Yeah. So I think to your point, I'm sorry, time zones are fun. I think it's a great idea, and I think we should encourage more of those distributions, especially amongst other ecosystems, to ensure that folks have that. So at the moment, I can speak for RubyGems. We don't have WebAuthn support. It's something that we're working on. So it's still TOTP application on the phone based. But for PyPI, they already had WebAuthn support, so it made a lot of sense to have the hardware tokens. The next person on my list is Trishunk.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I did see this controversy. Maybe surprising in some aspects, no, but at the risk of politicizing it a little bit, I feel it's a little bit kind of like vaccines. People don't like to be told what to do. So maybe there's a little bit, I don't want to speak for people who objections to this requirement. Generally, I'm in favor of MFA. Personally, I don't think it's difficult to use. I have 1 key for work, 1 key for my personal use. But I feel people feel like they're being told what to do, especially when they're volunteers. What they see, what they perceive, I'm guessing here, it's pure speculation on my part, they are doing this in their own personal time, and they, I guess, don't appreciate, being told, oh, hey, you're suddenly a critical open source project. We need you to do this, this, and this. So I can see both sides. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was the cat came in and I gave her a greeting.
Okay. So Yeah, I can see both sides of the argument. Generally, I think I'm in favor of this. And, you know, we even wrote a paper that I think I mentioned about before, investigating the impact of policies like this. But one comment I might want to make here is that, well, two actually. One is that, you know, if we have things like canary rollouts, even for our software, maybe we should have canary rollout for things as big and impactful as MFA. Even if it's a few hundred people, I don't think we should underestimate the impact of, you know, like turning it on all at once. And I don't think that was the plan here. I don't think so, but you know, maybe better communications there perhaps. The other thing is, this is a bit of a crazy idea, but I've been thinking about this recently over the weekend. Maybe at some point, and I think, yeah, this may be a thing for the OpenSSF, is that it might be at some point worth thinking about adopting some of this critical but small and underfunded open source projects. If the requirements become too much, for example. Again, that's a crazy, wild left field thought out there, but something I just wanted to mention anyway. Go ahead.
I think the Software Conservancy do something like that adoption process. David, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, my brain can only handle so many comments at one time, but let me, I'll quickly comment on the last, the underfunded projects. I mean, absolutely, that's, I mean, Alpha Omega in particular is specifically focused on that sort of things, and other things folks are too. I think you're actually right. I mean, the original poster actually said that, you know, who got all this going, you know, actually said that, hey, 2FA is actually a perfectly reasonable requirement. That person's worry was very much the, hey, what else are you going to make me do? Not the 2FA itself. And I will note, I put in this list because I think a lot of these things are being seen in isolation. The PyPI, they really are trying to start small because their goal is to do this across all of PyPI. The 1% means they're skipping the 99% they intend to get to. If you look at the notes I included here, I think most folks are not aware. They only see one ecosystem. I mean, this is, I think there's a problem, you know, the problem of the highly split up nature of most open source software communities. You know, the PyPI folks probably never hear about Ruby gems, and in many ways vice versa. And so I think a lot of folks aren't aware that PyPI is doing something like this. Ruby gems, NPM, of course, OpenSSF's great MFA distribution project. And what nobody seems to be noticing is that GitHub's going to require this for all accounts at the end of 2023.
Yeah, that's going to be fun.
That's going to be fun. But this is a, you know, oh my gosh, someone might require it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's interesting if I sort of follow on those comments. I can't reject the argument that it's an imposition on maintainers out of hand, in the sense that it's like some sort of categorical or epistemically incorrect argument, if I'm fancy. The way I've been looking at this is as a utilitarian calculus. When an account is taken over, for the maintainer, it's distressing. It might be embarrassing. It might be stressful. But for end user, it is potentially catastrophic, and there are far more end users overall. So if you take a very unromantic utilitarian calculus view of the ethics of the situation, then unfortunately we have to, on the balance of rights and interests, I think I come down on the side of the users, which means enforcing MFA. There's also the related argument, which I think is technically separate, which is what obligations do maintainers have? Often missing from that conversation is also like what obligations do the repositories have, and what is the contractual agreement between them? You know, from a maintainer's view, it's like I gave a license which said I give you no guarantees or promises beyond that you can use the software if you want. But the point is that like the repository arguably doesn't owe you anything either. It's still a volunteer service. It still has its own rights and ability to set terms of service. So I don't necessarily buy the argument that the repository is forcing anyone to do anything. You always had the choice not to use the repository. And that was true from day one, and it's still true. This concludes the very slow lecture. David, do you still have a question, or did you just still have your hand up from before?
I was going to try to respond. Remember, my brain is limited, so I can't remember all the comments backwards. But I do think actually the people don't want to be told what to do. I think is absolutely at least. It's hard to summarize, a massive discussion because different people have different motivations. But I think that is at least one of the issues. And so, and Jacques, I agree with you. There's trades and different people with different situations that make this discussion more complex. That's it.
Jacob, you were next.
So I admittedly have missed a lot of this discussion, but reading Armin's post that was linked, his point isn't that MFA is a problem. In fact, and I wonder if you would have been less upset if we had made it clear we're starting with the 1%, but we will eventually be requiring this for everyone.
Breaking up, Jacob.
Sorry, I wish I could do anything about that.
Yeah.
And the other thought is, his objection is your argument that there are more users than there are maintainers, and the consequences to users are much higher. Also applies to SLAs and required maintenance, and globally, burning out our maintainers is the correct thing to do for world health. But it's not a good policy for us to be pushing. And so when you say you're so important that you no longer decide how you participate, that is a problematic line according to Armin's logic, even if in this particular case he agrees with the decision, and even if in general we actually plan to apply it to everyone.
I'm confused. I thought the PyPI post was really clear that it's eventually going to apply to everything. Was that? Do you think people didn't read it, or do you think it was unclear in some way?
I don't know how clear the original post was, but Armin is responding to the fact that he was declared a critical dependency.
Yeah.
He's pretty clear in his post that he's not responding to MFA as a particular demand. He agrees with that. He's responding to being declared critical and therefore having different rules.
Sorry, I was under the impression that the post, and it's interesting that we all actually picked up on different parts of that post, right? And I sort of almost read that post as sort of trying to talk about actually the fact that consumers of open source have sort of been ignoring the problem of vetting and reviewing dependencies, right? And sort of instead of sort of blindly bumping versions up and just accepting whatever is in upstream, there is no process or tooling to sort of actually sort of do it intentionally and review it, how practical that is, et cetera, we can sort of argue about that. But there's sort of an interesting argument of sort of shared load in this specific case, whether the burden of that is sort of bared by the developers as opposed to being shared by also consumers, right? And I think that's a very interesting point, right, in the open source world that I don't think is actually getting addressed anyway.
That would be the reference to CargoVet, I believe. We actually, interestingly, the last session, we had a presentation on CargoVet for folks who weren't able to attend. It's worth, I believe we have the recording up. Worth tracking out. Was very interesting. I don't see them, like, I think a lot of difficulties in discussions about security countermeasures or risk countermeasures tends to come down to people thinking that you can only have one. Like it feels as though people feel that there's a limited number that, that you can use. I don't agree. I think CargoVet is a great idea. I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes in the cargo ecosystem and like what dynamics arise and what works well and what doesn't. Because off the top of my head, it looks great. And I want to, eventually import that idea to other ecosystems, ideally in a form that's somewhat compatible. So it's easy to do cross-ecosystem comparisons. I had a second point, which has now escaped me. I'm sure it was great. But yeah, I think it's an interesting post. I guess what I was hoping to do today just for myself, with my original cryptic comment of love for PyPI maintainers, was just to sort of say like, we're with you. Like, we think you're on the right track. There's reasons to discuss it, and there are fair debates to be had. But generally speaking, we're with you. Certainly, those of us who are in RubyGems land obviously agree, and I know that folks in NPM obviously agree because we're all rolling out those similar policies. I was surprised at first that PyPI seemed to cop it so much when everyone else had sort of been allowed to slip past without too much controversy. Then I crunched the numbers and I realized it's an orders of magnitude thing. Like for Ruby, it's about 100 dependencies. For NPM is 500, and for PyPI they're talking about 4,000 people. So it's a different order of magnitude.
Yeah, to be fair, because they did the 1%, it's about 3,500 packages. NPM did 100.
Yeah.
So I mean, it is literally a little more than one order of magnitude.
Yeah. So it just shook out that way, and I think we'll face similar discussions as we roll things out. We had someone in RubyGems who was who did show up to give feedback, which was not in favor. I'll put it that way. But didn't have as much Twitter presence, I guess. So I'm cognizant that we have other items on the agenda. Is there anything else we'd like to do with this? I don't think that we got to a sort of a consensus that we want to do anything like a statement or anything like that. I would propose that we be prepared to piggyback on the tax statement. If one get drafted and we like it, we can send it to the mailing list and get a whether there's any
they want to
objections.
try to get this done sooner rather than later. So
yes,
how's
I
this?
agree.
So here's what I suggest instead. If you are interested, in particular, you have some points you'd like to make, why don't you email Joshua Locke? I think that's who it is, right? Locke directly. If you need, I'll be happy to share offline the email, and if you don't already have that, and just go that way, because then we don't have to try to do the back and forth stuff. Because I think there's a goal of getting that some out sooner.
Yeah, I would like us to get that out sooner. Mostly, it would just be nice if we also said, Technical Advisory Council and Securing Software Repos Working Group.
Okay.
So I think once we have a draft, we'll send it to the mailing list, and if there's no particularly strong objection, we can add a name to that.
Okay, if you're going to do that, Jacques, I suggest you email Monsieur Locke,
Joshua?
so that so that he's aware of that.
Can you send me that email then?
I will
on Slack?
indeed. Yes.
Sweet. Okay, so the next on the agenda, Zach, on behalf of Sterling Green, talking about the glossary work that's been sort of in the works. We lose Zach? I can't see everybody at the moment, unfortunately. There we go.
I
Might
have
be
to
a muting
unmute.
problem.
Yeah.
That helps.
Okay, cool. So so Sterling started this document a month or two ago, basically with the goal of saying, we come to these meetings and then someone says repository and someone else says registry, and someone says package and someone says artifact, and they all kind of mean similar things, but often not quite the same thing. And these are often quite different across ecosystems. And I think if I can pick on Java for a moment, Sterling's particularly sensitive to it because the Java ecosystem has a lot of terminology that's pretty unique to it and not shared with a lot of everyone else. Whereas everyone else, and this is maybe better and maybe worse, uses the same words to mean very slightly different things. But this is something I think that is worth addressing if we're going to have productive conversations in this group, especially productive technical conversations in this group. And I think a good first step at this, as proposed by Sterling, is to basically, is to basically allow people to comment from various repositories, send information to Sterling on basically what do we call these things in your ecosystem, and then hopefully we can at least have a table for translation, if not agree on some ecosystem neutral terminology. I see a comment in the doc about the sharing settings. I don't believe that I have access to expand those, but I will email Sterling and see if he can update the link sharing settings.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments that folks had?
I think the only comment there would be that Salsa is sort of actually sort of going through the same thing, also trying to figure out the correct terminology to use for the artifacts and other things. So it'd be sort of interesting if there is a bit of alignment there between the two and reuse to make sure that, so because Salsa would be sort of an interesting part of all of that, right? And I'll link here the at least the current version of that.
That's useful to know. Yeah, it would be a pity if we had two different things at the OpenSSF that said glossary that disagree. That would reveal that we work in different groups rather than being a hive mind. Okay, next is Tim. Wanted to talk about the tough implementation that's being funded by the Drupal Association.
Yeah, so I know in general, the kind of scope and purpose of this sort of working group is less about specific tools and more about kind of policies, procedures, and sort of sharing common problems. But I did want to just pass along as something that folks might want to investigate, a new implementation we've been funding for sort of the server side of our kind of tough signing process. In the Drupal ecosystem, we sort of centrally manage the packaging of all of our repositories and things like that. And so we're integrating our sort of tough signing process into our packaging pipeline system. And it's been made generically to hopefully be useful in other use cases. And just in the interest of sharing, I wanted to pass it on. So there's some useful material in the documentation page that I linked there. And in particular, there's also a section linked off that first page called Tough for Humans, which might be useful if you're having conversations about sort of what that system is and why it's important and why you're implementing it within your own ecosystem. You might find a benefit in repurposing some of that work we've done, having that conversation within our community. So hope it's useful and happy to answer questions about it and also potentially connect people to the team that's been working with us on implementing this. So.
Very cool. I'm glad to see this happening. I think Tough is a fantastic design, and we struggled to decide which sort of angle we wanted to follow in the work we're doing on Ruby Gems as to where to prioritize Tough in the menu of possibilities and potential options. But we definitely see it as something we want in the long run.
Yeah, for us within the Drupal ecosystem specifically, we decided that, well, actually, before we had decided on Tough specifically, we decided that something like Tough was going to be a hard requirement in terms of supply chain security before we implement automated updates or within application module installers and things like that within the software ecosystem in general. And so from there, we were like, okay, what sort of minimum level of security practices that we want in place before we allow those sorts of software installation interactions in our systems. And, you know, we settled on deciding, okay, we want a robust implementation of Tough. And yeah, Trishank and I worked together early on in this process when we were first figuring out what to do. So shout out there as well.
No, this is great.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm really pleased to see this. I'm looking forward to Tough sort of rolling across multiple ecosystems. One thing that's interesting you might not be aware of, the Sigstore project have sort of like a Tough root delegation as a service thing that's been mooted, so that you don't have to necessarily manage a Tough root yourself. It can be managed on your behalf by the Sigstore group, which have a reasonably well-oiled key rotation sort of process now.
Yeah, I think we read some initial. Information about that, but I haven't revisited that in a while. So I think I should take another look for sure.
It's definitely going to be one of those. Oh, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think there's some initial design documentation for that, but it hasn't actually been used in practice yet. So if you're interested in being a test case for that, definitely let me know, and we can chat about that.
Okay, sounds good. I may reach out and Slack afterwards.
Cool. Yeah, it's sort of like, it's going to lead to the classic debate of like, is it better to do your own security or is it better to centralize?
Yeah,
the
and
eternal-
partially also what fits it into existing architecture and what doesn't,
Right.
which is the
Right,
other
right,
part here.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, thank you for that update. That was good. That was a great topic. I don't see any more topics on the agenda at this point. We have sort of three options here. One is someone else has something that's burning a hole in their head and that they need to share urgently. If you do, put your hand up and we can talk about that now. If you don't, the next option is that we return to another agenda item, although I think we reasonably talked about PyPI, which is the obvious contender. And the last one is that we get back 25 minutes of our time. Do folks have any strong feelings about what they would like to do? I can't see faces, unfortunately, so nods don't help me a lot. See, actually, if I stop sharing my screen, you'll just see the notes email. Now I can see people.
I'm back never hurts. I will say.
If you don't have something,
Yeah.
move on.
Yeah, cool. In that case, thank you everybody for a great meeting today. The action items I'm taking is that I need to talk to Joshua Locke and to share with the mailing list when we have a draft statement, and to seek if there are any hard objections to putting our name to it as a group.
And my action item is to send you his email address, but I've already done it.
Oh, well, see,
So
you got the
the
hard,
problem's already on you.
Yeah, you got the hard one. All right. Okay, folks, have a great day or great evening. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Bye.